Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh. Hadith Disciple Critical Book Review. The work that we want to share with you today, bi'idhnillahi subhanahu wa ta'ala, is called Hadith Rejection, a critical review. Munkirul Hadith, Al-Ru'ya Naqdiya, by Sayyid Iqbal Zahir. Then we have the back of the book. Once again, Hadith Rejection, a critical review. Munkirul Hadith, Al-Ru'ya Naqdiya, Sayyid Iqbal Zahir. Before we get started, bi'idhnillahi subhanahu wa ta'ala, with the description and the specifics of the book, it's a very good book, alhamdulillah, a worthy read, worthy of your time and your attention and your wealth to buy and purchase. And it's a very beneficial addition to the Islamic library, and hopefully a blow for the Hadith Renaissance, bi'idhnillahi subhanahu wa ta'ala. The author is Sayyid Iqbal Zahir. We have approximately, let's say here, guys, 100 pages in the book. It's East-West Educational Tools, Bangalore, India. Copyright 2013. All rights reserved. Iqra Publications those are the distributors. Dar es Salaam, Queens Road, Bangalore, in India. All right, 2013. The author, he mentions here Hadith of the Prophet ﷺ in the beginning, about the Prophet making dua for those who bear his words and pass them on others. We have the contents. We have the preface. We have the introduction or introductory. Then we have a bibliography. And then we have by the same author. And then we have the excerpt on the back of the book. It says here about the book: the Orientalists throughout the ages distorted the message of Islam in order to erect barricades against it. Following their footsteps in dishonest ways and adding on their own tweaks, Muslim elements have time and again raised issues against Islam. That is very important speech right there, guys. The Orientalists started something, and the Muslims who came behind them not only blindly followed them in what they started, but they added their own cinnamon and spice to it, and their own cultural things and misconceptions and pieces of falsehood to what the Orientalists had started about raising doubts against Islam in general, about the Quran and about Hadith. It then says, or the excerpt then says, it says here, in our times, rejection of Hadith is one such issue. Actually, Hadith is their first target. Islam is their ultimate goal. The present book is an attempt to expose the fallacious, or he says here, the fallacious nature of the claims laid out by those who reject the Hadith for whatever reason, both from among the Orientalists as well as the skeptics within the Muslim community at large. The author, Sayyid Iqbal Zahir, a mechanical engineer by training and profession, is today a well-known researcher and writer on Islam, its culture and civilization. Quite apart from the Tafsir Ishraq al-Ma'ani, the 14-volume commentary on the Quran, he is also the author of numerous books and booklets on Islam. Recently, he headed in his capacity as the chief editor, the ambitious and educational Encyclopedia of Islam project, which is a 2-volume, 1,300 multi-colored page compendium of knowledge on Islam, its civilization and heritage. Also, he says the Young Muslim Digest, one of the most authentic periodicals on Islam in English, has been edited by him for the last 3 decades. Then we have the preface of the book. It says here, history is a dark body with a few bright patches here and there. One such bright patch is Muhammad. Humanity waits for millenniums for the likes of him. It would take a whole page to name the great of past history, or the greats of past history, who can be named, whose deep influence over cultures and civilizations has remained stamped right until the 21st century. A history that ignores him in any epoch is not the history of the humanity, but perhaps history of an isolated people, an isolated culture, a history of the dark. Those after the Prophet who supplanted burnt-out Roman and Persian embers with sparkling beacons that radiated across centuries were not unaware of who was, after God, the first cause of it all. Early at Mecca, when he presented his call to the tribes around the town, one of the chiefs remarked, "This message will anger the Romans and Persians." So they knew what the call was about and who exactly the caller was. It was natural, therefore, that they should watch his very act and picked up every word, for the eager ears of their sons and grandsons were destined to live out their lives amid sand dunes and palm trees, shepherding camels and collecting dung, if it not for Muhammad. And then he goes on to mention some very beautiful speech in the preface with regards to the different historical foundations of Islam and of Hadith in general. And he wrote that on the 10th of April, 2013. Then he has an introductory. He says the first word: doubts, distrust, and skepticism are part of human psyche. But humans also possess a mind that differentiates between the reasonable and the unreasonable, truth and falsehood, and so identifies one from the other, to accept one and reject the other. But some minds seem to be programmed to work the other way. They can look straight into a wrong and blatantly assert that it is right, although convinced at their heart that it is wrong. That's a notable quote as well. Let's get started, inshallah, with the pros of the book, bidnillahi subhanahu wa ta'ala. The first pro is that the book is full of examples. Secondly, the author uses plenty of wit. His speech is witty. Number 3, he has many logical arguments. Number 4, it is a very enjoyable reading style. Number 5, the book is far from being on the defensive, all right, and apologetic. Rather, the author oftentimes attacks and engages. Number 6, he deals with a very serious, widespread phenomena, which is hadith rejection. Number 7, the author uses the technique of counter-argument. He attacks, and oftentimes he defends and he counter-punches. Number 8, a richness of names of important and significant personalities, both Muslim and non-Muslim. Orientalist, this Hindu, this Buddhist, this researcher, so on and so forth. Very important. Number 9, he quotes many things, not all, in Arabic. Number 10, the book gives us information about the author and his other works. Number 11, the book is very scientific and knowledge-like. Number 12, he exposed the deceitful and unethical ways of the Orientalists and their lack of scholastic integrity. Number 13 is the appearance of strong scholastic personality of the author. Number 14, he brings to the surface the supreme connection between the Orientalists and Hadith rejectors. Number 15 is the mention of his bibliography. As far as the cons of the books, first and foremost, the author isn't a specialist. As we read, the author works as a mechanical engineer. He wrote 15-volume work on tafsir. That's wonderful. That's fine. Then that's peachy. This periodical, this encyclopedia, this compendium. But what about Hadith? What has he been formally trained and educated in the field of Hadith? Number 2 is inconsistency in quoting Quranic verses in Arabic. Many times he quotes the verses, other times he won't. Number 3, he occasionally neglects hadiths or the reference of certain hadith and the citation of those hadiths, the takhrij. He'll just mention a hadith. Where is it found? Where is it collected? He leaves the reader hanging oftentimes. Number 4 is lack of consistent reference and citation for facts and pieces of information. Aside from the third con, we're not talking about hadiths no more. We're talking about actual statements, actual historical quotes and things like this. Number 5 is the inconsistency in quoting cited hadiths in Arabic. Sometimes he writes the hadith in Arabic, other times he doesn't, just like the Quranic verses. Number 6, the cited hadiths don't have the necessary tashkil. He mentions a hadith without the vowels, without the diacritical marks, the short, long vowel sounds, which is very crucial in helping the everyday English-speaking reader. Khairan, inshallah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So we'll mention a few notable quotes, bidnillah, and also a few examples of specific errors. The first notable quote we already read to you from the introductory. Then we have another one here. It says here on page 8. It says, as a body, they attempted to follow a simple strategy to discredit the hadith. It was worked out by their Western masters. All right. And he then says, from whom they say, between parentheses, as Sayyid Qutb put in another context, wag their tails and roll in the dust. They raise the question that is so disturbing to the masses. Is not the Quran enough for guidance? An innocent question, but plump with sinister feelings. If hadith is discarded, they knew the Sharia goes with it. Consequently, what's left of the Quran is some stories and admonitions. The rest of it, to be understood in light of hadith, is rendered functionless and shredded of most of its important character. That a complete religion, Islam, is reduced to the status of Judaism and Christianity. The next notable quote that we'll mention here is on page 13. Author says, in either case, the Prophet's commands and prohibitions, as in the hadith literature, acquire legal status. The hadith cannot be rejected. Without rejection of the Quran, in consequence, The command to face Jerusalem was not issued in the Quran, yet only those who were declared believers who obeyed the Prophet. Then we have another quote here on page 30. He says here, some people are simple enough to ask, what about the original collections of the Hadith or the Hadith are? This is similar to some people of the non-English world wondering whether Shakespeare could really be the author of the plays attributed to him, seeing that although he appeared a mere 450 years ago, not a single of his 40 plays has survived in its original. And he was only 450 years ago. What about the Prophet? What about the ulama of Hadith who lived over 1,000 years ago? Another notable quote, let's say maybe page 77, author says, challenges for the rejectionists. First challenge. Rejecting Hadith is a challenging task. The Prophet arrived in the full light of history, at a time when the art of reading and writing had already taken a respectable position among the Islamic Arabs. Ibn Sa'd wrote, the complete man during the time preceding the advent of the Prophet and immediately after him was he who possessed three arts. 1, ability to write Arabic. 2, expertise in swimming. And 3, skill in archery. At-Tabaqat al-Kubra, volume, says 542, page 3. Perhaps it's the exact opposite. Volume 3, page 552 or 542. He says here, Ubadah, for instance, was known in Jahiliyyah as Al-Kamil, the perfect man, because he had mastered these three arts. Some counted arithmetic as another necessary qualification. Now we'll mention a few specific sins, actual scientific errors of the author. First on page 10. Says here, when one says, for example, obey the law and obey the custom, then one is advising obedience to two separate entities, law and custom. He is not saying obey the law, obey the law. Another ayah makes it all more clear. O believers, obey Allah and obey the messenger and those of authority amongst you. Obviously the ayah is not saying, there's some issues with regards to that translation. He's rendering back to what he's just saying. Moving forward, page 22. Author says, it says, لا تكتبوا عني ومن كتب عني غير القرآن فليمحو وحدثوا عني ولا حرج ومن كذب علي متعمدا فليتبوأ مقعده من النار. It says in the translation, do not write from me. Whoever wrote from me anything apart from the Quran may erase it. However, narrate from me. There is no harm. But remember, whosoever fastened an intentional lie upon me may find his resting place in the fire. So the hadith is allowing freedom to narrate. Now, narrations can be of two kinds, written and oral. The Prophet discouraged written and recommended oral. When did the Prophet ﷺ discourage writing down things? He said a specific ruling. If you wrote anything other than the Quran, then erase it for a specific meaning, a specific period. But to say that he absolutely discouraged writing, it's not something that's necessarily 100% accurate. Also, a few issues with the translation of the hadith as well. Then we have on page 23, it says, few Arabs of these times were literate. The Prophet had initiated the art of reading and writing. The Prophet initiated the art of reading and writing. But it will be some time before they would master the art to some degree. He did not want the immature to mess up with his ahadith. Next point, he's harmonizing between that one narration and the countless narrations in which the companions wrote down hadiths. The Prophet told them to write down hadiths. He says, number 4, because there was no exchange of written materials, there could not have been any consensus over how exactly the alphabets were to be inscribed. Maybe somebody's ra was another's dal. They didn't know that, the alphabet, their own letters. Those who did know how to read and write, very, very interesting. And then we have another one on page 24 as well. There are a few more in the book. These are most of them. If you get a chance to go on page 41, it's another very notable quote, the Prophet Sulaiman's vow. He mentions a major point here with regards to those who use this to reject hadiths. At the end of the day, this is a very good book, a very beneficial work. And the grade that we give it in Hadith Disciple, we give the author 4.5 quills out of 5. 4.5 out of 5 quills, bidnillah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Hadith Rejection and Critical Review by Sayyid Iqbal Zahir. Thank you very much for watching and listening.